Coping with continued e-commerce growth. Well, joining us today to speak about that, Paul Ambruso, Vice President and General Manager of Mobile Robotics at Berkshire Grey. Paul, it's great to see you. Welcome.
Thank you, Russell.
Well, I think it's no surprise that, of course, we saw with the pandemic just an absolute explosion in e-commerce sales. Now, we're in a post-pandemic world, and yet we are seeing continued e-commerce growth. And I guess the question is the impact that you see on retail and on e-commerce as well. What's going on there?
Indeed, Russell. We have experienced in the last 3 years of the pandemic what is an acceleration of the next 3 to 5 years of growth in e-com. So what we're trying to figure out now is that going to be sustainable from that point forward or not? We are seeing a bit of a decrease in that growth over time, which has been concerning to some, particularly with inflationary pressures that we're seeing across the board. But generally speaking, if you take a look at what the growth rate was before the pandemic and what it is today, you're seeing that that growth rate has remained fairly consistent year over year. Take the pandemic out, and we're still seeing significant growth rates in e-com, which are also, by the way, impacting retail stores as well. So we can't forget that e-com is delivered in many cases through the store. So you have buy online, pick up in store, you have curbside, and you have last mile delivery. Those are all also impacting brick and mortar. So this growth rate is continuing, even though it has decelerated a bit, and is still within the range that we expected it to be 3 years ago before the pandemic. That means that all the problems we saw before in terms of being able to provide automation to alleviate and be able to support that growth are still there.
So, Paul, you just set up my second question. All of the problems that we were experiencing before are continuing. So I guess the question then is, well, what do we do? How do we address those going forward? What do you say?
Indeed. So there are basically three main problems that I see within the scope of enabling this growth to continue across e-commerce as well as retail sales. The first one has to do with labor availability. Now, we all know that labor is scarce. We know that the growth of e-commerce and retail is faster than the growth of the availability of a labor force. As such, we need to be able to drive towards models that use less of that labor through the implementation of automation. There's also a skill concern around that labor, in that we have to be able to not only find labor, we have to retain it, and it has to be of the high or a higher level of skill that we might be able to obtain. That's on the one side. The other issue we have, generally speaking, is that there's not enough physical space. So as you continue to grow in e-commerce and retail, you need more space to hold your inventory, to process the inventory, and to deliver the inventory. So space is still at a premium, which means we have to have denser solutions and solutions that fit into more constrained, difficult to fit spaces. And last but not least, we still have a really high variability in the types of inventory and the placement of inventory across stores and across other centers for distribution, meaning that we have to be able to handle variability of goods and availability of goods on a more localized basis. This is where the concept of hyper-local, hyper-fast delivery comes into play. People want things still within the same day or the next day. That means goods have to be closer to them, they have to be available in terms of what they want, and they have to be able to be delivered within that time frame.
So you set up then the problems that we are facing. Now, some of these things, you can throw a little money at labor, but that doesn't necessarily solve the labor shortage, problem right there. So then the question is, well, what do we do? And of course, there are any number of types of automation that we might want to consider implementing. So let's drill down into that and talk about how we are actually going to deal with and solve these problems that you've just outlined. What do you say?
Indeed. So taking a look at those same three problems, if you look at the scope of labor supply, one of the things we can do is make the automation be easier to use, easier to learn. This is as easy as saying, for example, learning something on your cell phone. You load an application, you operate it, it's got to be as easy as that. So the skill level doesn't have to be of a really high level. It can be a person that can basically learn how to operate a consumer application on a cell phone. We have to get to that level of ease of use. That then implies that we have labor components that can come into play, which are going to be easier to find and easier to maintain, because then that labor that already existed can not only be brought in or taken into other areas that are of higher value to the business, but it's also going to be labor that will be happier because they'll be doing jobs that they find are more supportive of what they want to do. So the labor component is brought in not only for less of a skill level, but also is dedicated to areas that have more importance or benefit to that labor force per se. For physical spaces, flexibility. It needs to be there. Scalability, it needs to be there. You can install anywhere, you can install it quickly, and you can scale it readily and as well as easily. And last but not least, you have to be able to deliver the goods at the right time in the right place. This means grouping goods, sequencing goods. It means delivering goods to trucks at the right time so you have shorter dwell times. It means being able to deliver goods that are using up less air in ship vessels and transport vehicles. So automation has to incorporate not just the ease of use aspect from the labor perspective, but it has to also incorporate how flexible you need to be to deploy in tight spaces, and you have to be able to deliver the right goods at the right time to support that hyper-local, hyper-fast delivery.
Paul, final question, because now that you've talked about these the challenges that the industry is facing and some of the solutions, I'm sure there's somebody out there that's saying, well, I'm not 100% clear on what it is that Berkshire Grey does and how they might be addressing these issues. So tell us a little something about the focus of the company and how you are optimizing the operations of your customer base. What do you say?
Certainly. Berkshire Grey takes a complementary approach to the problem, meaning that we take various approaches to solutions and we marry them together. On the one side is our product effort. We deliver products that enable you to group goods together, sequence goods together, make them aisle ready, make them department ready, like we do with our mobile sortation systems we call BG Flex. We also are able to provide returns processing efforts. For example, as e-commerce grows, returns processing volume also grows. So we have solutions like our RPSI, which is identification and restocking of goods that come in for return so they can be resold. Separately, we pursue an amplification strategy, meaning existing robotic automation, which today may be limited in throughput. We can help to amplify that amount of throughput by adding components to it that improve that. As an example, if you're using a pick assist model, let's just say, that does batch processing, we deliver robotic shuttle put walls, RSPWs, that are able to take more and more and more of that batch process goods system and deploy them into up to 240 different orders in one location per put wall. So that allows you to pick more in batch processing as well as be able to distribute to more orders at a time. Furthermore, we work with partners, we work with systems integrators that allow you to complete the picture overall. So we look for the best possible solution from our products and those that others can also provide as a complementary fashion. And last but not least, we also offer RaaS as a service models as well as CapEx models. So if the customer wants to do a shorter timeline or wants to dip their toes in or simply wants to go down a path that doesn't require an initial outlay of capital investment, we have the RaaS model as well as CapEx models for longer term investments or larger scale deployments.
You're doing good work in a very, very important area. Thank you, Paul, for finding the time to sit down and speak with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Russell. Appreciate the time.
It's Paul Ambruso, Berkshire Grey, speaking with us today about coping with continued e-commerce growth, perhaps in your enterprise. Thanks for watching.